So I'm out at my neighborhood park. There's a bald eagle's nest up there. So I was just checking it out to see if anybody was home. I was using my long lens. There's nobody there right at the moment. But it got me to thinking. I get a lot of questions from beginning photographers about why their photos are blurry. How come they can't get a sharp photograph? And usually we start by blaming our gear, right? We're like, it's a bad lens, it's a cheap lens, it's a kit lens, or I need a better camera, I need full frame, or some other, gear-related gadget that we need. But the most common causes of blurry images is not a problem with the gear. It's usually a problem or a lack of understanding of some very basic photographic principles. So before you go trading in your lenses or buying a new camera body, let me explain why we all get blurry images from time to time. So let's start by just talking about the differences between blurry, out of focus, and depth of field. All three of these can produce very similar looking results, but the most important thing is that some of these are done intentionally. So if I'm shooting a moving subject, say I'm shooting a race car on a racetrack and it's zipping around, and I'm panning my camera from left to right or right to left, I'm panning my camera, I am going to produce a photo that has a very blurry background, but hopefully that race car is going to be very, very sharp. But since I'm panning and I'm moving the camera intentionally, that background is going to be very, very blurry. Again, that gives the impression of speed, and it also lets the viewer focus on the subject, which in this case is going to be the race car. So let's say I'm shooting a portrait. If I'm shooting a portrait of a person or an animal, then a lot of times, most of the time, I'm going to use a very shallow depth of field. So I'll be shooting it like at a very open aperture. So I'll be shooting at like f2.8, maybe even less or somewhere around in there. And when I do that and I focus on the subject, that's going to blow out the background. It's going to create what they call a bokeh, or a blurry, out of focus background. And again, that's an intentional thing on the photographer's part. So by doing that, it allows the viewer to focus on your subject, which is your person or your animal, and it creates a blurry background to eliminate all those distractions back there. But what about when you're trying to get everything in focus and you don't want blurry, and you're not trying to get a blurry background, or you're not doing a panning shot? What about then? So let's go over some things you can check. So number one, the first thing to look at is, and the most common problem is, your shutter speed is too slow. This is by far the most common problem or issue or cause of a blurry or seemingly out of focus photograph. Especially if you're shooting in automatic or aperture priority mode, it's very, very easy for the camera to make those decisions, and you're not paying attention to it, and you're hand holding, you take the shot and it's blurry. So while using a tripod might seem like the most obvious fix, and for landscape photography, most of the time that is the answer, sometimes it's just not feasible or desirable to use a tripod. So you always need to be sure that your shutter speed is fast enough when hand holding to freeze the motion that you don't want moving, or even on a tripod, such as trees, flowers, or someone's hair on a windy day. Now, if you're hand holding, and it doesn't have to be a long lens, but this goes for any lens, but if you're hand holding, the general rule of thumb for shutter speed in order to get a photograph that's not going to be blurry is you want to put 1 over the focal length. So for example, if I'm shooting at 300 millimeters on my camera, then I want to have a shutter speed at a minimum of 1/300th of a second, or somewhere around there, as close as you can get. Now, if your camera or lens has image stabilization built in, of course that's going to allow you, it's going to help, and it will allow you to shoot at a slower shutter speed. Some of the newer cameras, the mirrorless cameras, are going to have in-body stabilization as well. However, all of the camera wizardry and magic that happens inside of this is not going to compensate for just bad technique. So let's talk about how to minimize that. When shooting handheld with a slower shutter speed, you want to make sure to think of your arms and your body as a tripod. So a good form and technique to use when hand holding, it doesn't have to be a long lens, it can be any lens, is to obviously hold the camera with two hands, bring your elbows in close to your body, and then use the viewfinder here to provide a third point of contact on your face. So with your legs slightly spread, stable stance, elbows tucked in, and this is going to provide a much more stable platform to shoot from than this. If you've got your elbows out and you're using the big screen on the back in order to compose your shot, there's a lot more chance for movement. Whereas here, it's much more stable. You can also brace yourself against a tree or rock or wall or something else to give you further stability. Reason number 2, your camera simply couldn't focus. If you don't get a happy little beep or your focus button, your little focus reticle doesn't turn green, odds are your camera wasn't able to accurately focus. This happens if you focus on an area that doesn't have much contrast, like the sky or shadows or some water. So if I go down here to this area of the water, was able to focus there, I had a spot, there we go. It's not giving me a focus beep. It's not able to accurately focus. Eventually it might, but the easiest thing to do is make sure you've got a good focus. So move your focus point over an area of contrast, get that happy little beep, and you're good to go. Okay, reason number 3. Let's say your subject is moving. You're out in your yard, you're photographing your dog, he's running all around. If you have the wrong focus mode selected, odds are you're not going to get a sharp photograph. With a moving subject, you need to make sure, number 1, that your camera is in continuous autofocus. That means as long as your shutter is down or your focus button is pressed, the camera is continuously focusing. Normally, it's only going to focus, and you hear that little beep, and that's where it's going to focus, is on that point. So in continuous autofocus mode, you're going to be focusing wherever that focusing box, that focusing reticle is. It's going to continuously focus there. The second thing you want to make sure is that you keep that focusing reticle, that little box, over your subject if it's moving around. Or you can also set, in a lot of the newer cameras, you're going to be able to set an autofocus tracking mode where you'll put the reticle over something that's moving, and then the camera will recognize it as an animal or a person or an object that's moving, and then it will actually move that reticle for you. As long as you keep it reasonably in the frame, your camera will automatically track it. As long as it's tracking it and you're in continuous autofocus mode, you should be good to go. Reason number 4, your camera focused on the wrong spot. If you're shooting in fully automatic mode, the little green box, your camera decides where to focus. You push the button, it focuses, you take the photograph, and that's all it does. Sometimes it'll get it right, other times it totally misses. So the easy solution is get off of the automatic mode into maybe one of the other semi-automatic modes that allows you to choose a focus point. So I'm going to go 1 over to program, and now it's going to allow me to move my focus. And if I wanted to focus over here on the left, I could. If I wanted to focus down here in the water, I can. If I want to focus over here on the right, on this post, I can. Reason number 5, your depth of field is just too shallow. So if you're shooting at a very wide open aperture, f1.8 or 2.0, 2.8, the depth of field is going to be pretty shallow. And you really need to fully understand how depth of field relates to focal length and how much depth of field you have to play with. Otherwise, you're going to fail more often than you succeed. Generally speaking, wider angle lenses are going to give you a larger or deeper depth of field than a telephoto lens at the same aperture. So if you're struggling getting everything in focus, then just try stopping down to like f5.6, even to f8, and see if that solves your problem. If it does, you're not controlling your depth of field the way you should. And number 6, after looking at all of these other possibilities and you're still not getting sharp photographs, check it. It might be the lens. So put it on a tripod. You're going to set your camera for f8, f5.6. Those are usually the sweet spot on the lens. You're going to place and shoot against a solid perpendicular wall. This is the best thing to do, like a brick wall, something that has texture that your camera can really get a good focus lock on. Take the shot, examine it on the computer, because usually on the back of the screen you're not going to be able to tell really well enough. So you want to download that file to your computer and you want to zoom in at 100% and see if it's sharp. If it's sharp at f8 and f5.6, then odds are it's not the lens. If you're getting missed focus and things aren't sharp where you're putting that focus point, then you probably have a problem with your lens or possibly the camera body, and you might want to get it serviced. There are my 6 reasons that your photos might be coming out blurry. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you got something out of it. If you did, I'd love to hear a comment below, or if I missed a reason that photos might be coming out blurry, leave that down below as well. If you haven't yet, I definitely would appreciate it if you'd subscribe to my channel. Don't forget to hit the notification bell and give me a thumbs up if you liked it. It really does help the channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.